Welcome to the lecture on constructing knowledge. Today we're going to talk a little bit about how we use language, things that we think versus things that we know, um, the difference between knowing and believing, and just looking at methods for thinking critically about statements and really the definition of what it means to know. A lot of what we've been talking about so far has dealt with the truth and falsity of premises and how they entail conclusions. And it's important to know really when something is true versus when we believe something to be true, which is rather different. And so when we look at the distinction between believing and knowing something, it's important to recognize that what we know is much more limited probably than what we think. Um, most things that we think are true are mere beliefs. And you can see some examples here between things that are believed to be true versus things that are known to be true. So, for instance, I know that I will die. Here we have a statement that is true. This is something that I know, and this is something that I can be confident in terms of supporting a premise with this particular statement. Remember, when we're looking to form arguments, when we're thinking critically, evaluating arguments, we want to know what is justifiable, what is true, versus what is contested and what might require more evidence. And so I know that I will die. That is just kind of at its foundation something that is known to us. Now, compare that with something like, I believe that there is life on other planets, or the idea that I believe that working hard will lead me to a happy life. These, even though they may be true, perhaps are likely to be true, we don't know them to be true, right? We don't know that they're true statements necessarily. We believe that they're true based on other information, maybe based on inductive probability. However, these are not things that are actually known to be true. And recognizing that will give us kind of more of an open mind when dealing with other people or arguments, and really asserting our position that we think is true, but we know we could be wrong, right? And having that appreciation for the fact that when you assert a position, there's a chance that you could be wrong about it is important when it comes to critical thinking. And so when we think of knowledge and truth, there are three stages to this. Um, again, this isn't anything really set in stone. This is just kind of how we typically evolve when it comes to knowledge, right? When we're young children, we kind of have this Garden of Eden stage of life where, right, everything is new, everything is true. We're learning how to do these things. We're learning about society, government, walking, talking, how to use the bathroom, right? We're learning that um, you should be kind, to share, respect, things like that, right? Everything coming in is just kind of sticking and being absorbed. And then as we get older, typically within our kind of teenage years and maybe our early 20s, we start to develop into this kind of anything goes subjectivity stage of knowledge, right? Nothing is true, everything is subjective, everybody has their own opinions about things and beliefs, and nothing is objective or set in stone. But this, of course, isn't necessarily the case either, right? Um, because again, if we were to know that everything was subjective, that would be kind of a self-defeating claim. Um, we would think that everything is subjective, but we wouldn't know that. Otherwise, we would have some objective truth there. And so we develop in our later years into the kind of thinking critical stage. And this is when we develop a lot of the tools that we've been talking about in this class. We begin to learn how to evaluate. We begin to learn the logic, perspective sharing, having that open mind, patience, and so forth. It really allows us to discern good from bad arguments, what's true and what's knowledgeable versus what is believed or thought to be true. And this is perhaps the most important aspect of really gaining knowledge. Famously said by Socrates, the only thing that I know is that I don't know anything. This kind of engulfs that mentality of understanding there are limits to knowledge. However, there are certain things that we can know for certain analytical truths uh, that we can be confident in, that we can use as justification when it comes to developing arguments or analyzing arguments. And so when we start to evaluate beliefs that we have, there are a couple things that we should be kind of checking off the list, right? When we're evaluating our beliefs, we should know certain authority figures that have similar understandings, that have provided certain backwork and research to help guide our beliefs. Written references, right? This goes into writing and making assertions and justifying your position, and having kind of that factual evidence, right? Having not just good logical opinion, not just having good anecdotal or personal experience supporting a position, but also having that core foundational truth, factual evidence, is going to help us when it comes to evaluating our beliefs. So really knowing, right, who the authorities are, what are the references that have been written down, what's the factual evidence backing it up, is there anecdotal evidence that we can provide from our own life, and then does it kind of fit the mold of that logical formation. And so right now, we tend, when it comes to discerning knowledge from belief, have a theory put forth that what knowledge is a justified true belief. And be aware that this understanding of what knowledge is a theory itself, right? So when we think of how do we know something is true, right? Philosophers like Descartes, rationalists, or John Locke, an empiricist, have gone through how we develop knowledge. But when it really comes to knowing whether something is true and how can we be guaranteed of truth versus just thinking that something is true or having a belief, right? We've come to settle kind of on the idea that, well, something is considered knowledge if it's true first, so we know it's factual, that it's justified, and that we actually believe that it would be true. And so this is really an attempt to explicate propositional knowledge. However, we'll see later that this, again, is a theory in itself, so it's going to have its problems as well, and we need to be aware of that when it comes to understanding whether or not we know something to be true or not to be true. I may think something is true because I have a justified true belief in it. However, as we'll see later, we can still end up being wrong. And so when it comes to the truth aspect, right, in order for something to be knowledge, we would tend to think that, well, it must be true, right? You can't have knowledge of something that's a false statement. So if I were to make the example, Donald Trump is the author of the United States Constitution, I couldn't know this to be true because it's false, right? This isn't considered knowledge because it's a false. And so one of the requirements for knowledge is this idea that you have true factual statements. Now, the belief condition aspect, it gears more towards my kind of behavior, my thought process. And so if, for example, Sam is asked if he believes he got a question right on a test, and he replies, no, I got it wrong. But then it turns out that he did get it right, would we say that Sam knows the answer to that question? And it wouldn't seem like that would be the case. Even though he got it right, something was telling him he like to circle this answer or to fill in this bubble. He would still not be thought to know the right answer because when asked, he would believe that no, he got it wrong. And so for knowledge, we would think that there needs to be some kind of attitudinal belief where you think that you are right about something, right? If you think you are wrong about something, then it would be weird to suggest that you have knowledge of that thing, right? Without that level of confidence. And then lastly, the justification condition when it comes to knowledge, right? It's important that when we feel that we know something and that we believe something, that that thing is justified, right? So Sam is confident and believes that the coin flip will turn up heads. So if I flip a coin, do I have justification for the coin landing heads? Here it would seem no, right? Because again, you would think that knowledge would require a certain level of justification. And when it comes to flipping a coin, there is no justification. It's a 50-50 heads or tails. And so I never really know if the coin flip is going to come up heads or tails because there's no justification for one over the other. It's just a random coin flip. And so we want all three of these things together in order to suggest that we know something. And so when we're writing, when we're thinking about these different theories, it's important that we think to ourselves, is this something I believe? Is this justified? And then is it true? And these are going to be pretty much the minimum requirements. But again, even with these requirements, we still seem to have a problem that's expressed in the video that's going to accompany this week's modules. And so Edmund Gettier discovered this problem with the justified true belief theory and provided an example where you can have a justified true belief, check all three boxes, but still be wrong about something, or still not be thought to know something was the truth. So as a quick example, let's say that I see a sheep in a field in the distance, and I come to the conclusion that there is a sheep in the field. So I have a belief that there is a sheep in the field, and I have a justification that there's a sheep in the field because I can see the sheep. However, unbeknownst to me, that thing that I thought was a sheep is actually just a dog, and I'm seeing it incorrectly. However, beyond the dog is a sheep that is outside of my view. So here, it would be true that there's a sheep in the field. However, my justification is not pointing to the sheep, it's pointing to the dog, but I do believe the dog is a sheep, so I have the belief that there's a sheep in the field, so I have a justified true belief, and yet in this instance we would think to ourselves, well, this really isn't considered a piece of knowledge, right? We can't be confident in this piece of knowledge, even though it's true, even though it's justified, and even though I believe it, because it would seem as though I just kind of lucked into the answer, lucked into the assertion that there's a sheep in the field without really knowing that there's a sheep in the field. And so when it comes to thinking critically about really anything, it's important to understand that most things that we're thinking critically about when we talk about ethics, when we talk about politics, economics, religion, how to treat other people, all of these things, how to live the best life that we can live, these are things that are fairly controversial and subjective, right? And to suggest that we know that these behaviors should be accepted, that these are the things that we should be doing, this is the type of political economic system that we should be running, these are going to be roughly more beliefs than knowledge. And so it's our job to think critically about those beliefs, try and justify them to the best of our ability to come to a higher level of truth, right? And this is where we get that Socratic method. I put an assertion forward, then you counter that assertion, and then I counter the counter, and we seem to kind of walk up this ladder of becoming closer to truth because we are evaluating each other's positions, using each other's perspectives, and perspective sharing to really try and understand what is true and real with the world. And so having these understandings when it comes to critical thinking is going to be, or having these understandings when it comes to uh, the world is going to be beneficial when it comes to thinking critically, and thinking critically is going to be beneficial when it comes to making these assertions, right? Because we don't want to assert and protest and um, do all of the things uh, that you see today in terms of really pushing your position forward if you're wrong about something. And so thinking critically and going through these steps, understanding really what knowledge is and the justification behind these truths is going to be a very important process.